spots.
Welcome to this meeting of the Ennis Historical Society. We're mighty glad to have you. There's a roll over here, and I'd like for y'all to, if you haven't already, to sign in before you leave. We want to make sure that we take account that y'all are here. And if your name's not on it, add it to there, if you will. Okay. So, to my introduction of Jim. Jim is a long time, everybody knows him, but he's been here a while and grew up here and has always been interested in trains. When he gave Judy, my wife, some notes about himself for publication, he mentions that every child back in the day, every boy, used to dream of getting a train for Christmas, right? And that's still going on, to tell you the truth. Jim, our daughter's eldest grandson got a train on his first birthday, and so it's still happening. Everybody loves the trains. That when the big boy came through, that was a huge gathering, and it was a wonderful day. Jim was one of the first people that came to our house and introduced himself when we moved here 6 years ago, and we became great friends, confided in each other. We joined the church the same day on purpose, and I admire Jim. He's a good friend and a good friend of Ennis.
Can you hear that?
Yes, sir.
Not too loud, is it? Well, Steve, thank you very much for those comments. I want to echo some of the things that he said. We appreciate very much that you're all here. And our goal is that you will leave here with more than you came in with. Ennis has had a rich heritage with trains. It's hard to realize, or it's hard to think about. Come on in. What would have happened to Ennis, and where would Ennis be today if it had not had the partnership with the trains back in the early part of the century, going all the way back in 1800. If you'll just look around the museum and you're here tonight, you'll see what the history means. And I will tell you, I've been on that the Railroad Museum board for a number of years. We could double the size of this thing tomorrow if we had the votes. We've got that kind of capacity. And I hope one of these days that we'll be able to expand on it. I can remember when the Southern Pacific was probably the largest employer in town. And I remember vividly on railroad payday, now Boone will remember this too, railroad payday, the two lanes, we only had two, the lobbies were filled up with people cashing their checks or depositing the checks. That's still vivid in my mind, and what the railroad meant. What I want to do tonight, folks, is pull a nugget out of the history book, put it up there under the light, and talk a little bit about the Texas-Midland Railroad. Now, the Texas-Midland is not something that many people know much about. Is that right, CJ?
As far as I know.
But it's a good story, and it's an interesting story. It's a story with some drama, some wealth, some grit, some greed, and some sex. And that always sells. My challenge tonight really is, and the board has got me on a short string, so this will not be a long talk, although I could talk longer than I'm going to. That'll make somebody feel better. But I'm going to divide it up into 3 parts. One, I'm going to talk about the railroad, Texas-Midland, the history of it from the beginning to the end. Then I want to roll in and talk about Hetty Green. Hetty Green was responsible for what happened to Texas-Midland, and when she bought it, and she was from New York City. And then, if we have the time, I want to talk about her son, Ned, who she sent down here at 25. At that point, he was a spoiled brat, rich brat, but he turned out to be a pretty good railroad man. So, part 1, Texas-Midland. The year is 1882. The Houston, Texas Central Railroad decided, and this is when the railroad industry was booming, okay? They decided they wanted to be a short line railroad from Paris, Texas, over to Terrell, and then out of Terrell in through Kaufman, and then over to here, and they came through all those small towns, Scurry, Rosser, Allsdorf, Crest, and ended up in Perry, of all places, which is just hard to hear. Their plan was that they would build this short line, that they would hook up at the Frisco, at Paris, and go all the way to St. Louis. And down here, they would hook up at either Garrett or Ennis with the Houston and Texas Central, and go all the way to Galveston South. Well, it wasn't run very good. And after 3 years, they only had 52 miles of track. Now, from Garrett down to a place called Roberts, which is down in East Texas. I didn't know where it was, but I researched it. It's down in East Texas, down around Quinlan. And then they put it into receivership and bankruptcy. Joyce would have liked the bankruptcy part. She's good at that. It was in bankruptcy for 7 years. Nothing ever happened. Equipment deteriorated. It just sat there. And then after 7 years, here comes Hetty Green from New York City. Now Hetty, we'll talk a little bit about her in detail in a minute. Hetty was the richest woman in the country, and some say in the world at that point. She bought it, sent her son Ned down here at 25 to run it. He needed something to do, and he showed up. And they capitalized it with $500,000 of capital. And can you imagine Hetty Green walking into the American National Bank in Terrell, it's still there, by the way, the American National Bank, and depositing a $500,000 check into his account? It was twice the size of the bank. Can you imagine what the bankers thought? Well, you know what they did? They immediately made him vice president. I don't know if Ned was, he was a well-educated guy, as I'll tell you in a minute. If he was good or he was lucky. But he came down here and he hired some really good railroad people, and he gave them a charge, and then he got out of the way. And they ran it, and he just held them accountable. And in 3 years, another 3 years, they had built it out all the way to Paris. They upgraded the equipment. They bought all kind of engines. I think they started with 5, and they ended up with 16 engines. And they were rolling. Somebody tell me, what do you think? Well, the biggest job they had was freight. What was that? What do you think that was? Boom, what was that?
What was the question again?
Hello?
Well, I don't catch everything.
No, I'm sorry. I'm trying to be. Their business was freight.
Right.
And what do you think their biggest commodity was and what they hauled? Cotton, absolutely. Cotton was big in this part of the country. Of course, none of us were here, and some of you may already know this. In 1920, Ellis County produced more cotton than any county in the country. And of course, Jimmy and I grew up here. We remember how much cotton there was. I mean, boy, there were cotton gins all over. But anyway, that was their biggest commodity. They also handled livestock. Some of it coming from Sand Lake. They also handled some brick. And I brought 2 bricks here, one from Chris and one from Ennis Chris. And I've also got I've got a spike over here that you can look at later that I pulled out of a cross tie 25 years ago that was in the road bed, and I had it cleaned up and I had it framed. Anyway, they were very successful. They ran it until 1928, and then that's when they sold to the Southern City. Now, Nettie died in 1960, so they ran it for another 11 years before they sold to the Southern City. Southern City ran it for a number of years until, and Jerry knows this very well, till 1942, and the Trinity River Bridge washed out. Jerry knows a lot about Trinity River going on, and it washed out, and they abandoned the line from Ennis to Coffin. And then from then, they just continued to disband up until about 1958, and that's when they abandoned the last section from Commerce to Greenville. And so it was no longer there. Does anybody know where the location of the Texas-Midland office was? Anybody? I shared this with somebody with the board, so some of the board may know. Like any good lawyer, you never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. It's right around the corner at Breckenridge, at the corner, and we remember where Sider Chevrolet and Bruce Brown Chevrolet was. That's where it was. There was an office there and a freight depot behind it. And the tracks ran right down Breckenridge. So they came all the way from from Terrell over here and ran right down that. Hetty Green. You know, I tell you, a psychiatrist would have a field day with this family. Hetty was a very colorful person. Let me kind of set the stage for you. Bear with me just a minute. Hetty Green. She hated everything and everybody except money and the two children whose lives she ruined. She particularly loathed members of the bar. Every time a lawyer gets near me, I want to throw up. Some of them said, man, that feeling is what? The richest and most detested woman in the world. She built her fortune by devouring Wall Street bulls and bears with equal pleasure. She lived in a Hoboken slum and carried her lunch, cold oatmeal, to work. She was known as the Wicked Witch of Wall Street. When she was age 5, she sat on her father's lap while he read the financial report. When she was 6, she was reading the report to him. When she was 13, she was his bookkeeper. So she was very good at numbers. She was very, very good at numbers, and she was a good deal maker. This quote came out of the book. She quoted this in a meeting one time. When I fight, there is generally a funeral. And it isn't mine either. She had a philosophy, like a philosophy that an old friend of mine in Dallas had. When he told me one day, he said, Jim, he said, I sell at funerals. I buy at funerals and I sell at weddings. And that was kind of her philosophy as well. As you can tell, she was very tight with money. A penny saved is a penny earned. We've all heard that, and she lived by that. And get this, guys. Get this. She had one dress. It was long, it was black, and she very seldom ever cleaned it. This is true. She had one dress, and she wore it every day. She was very tight, as I mentioned, and I'll give you 2 quick examples. One, her son, Ned, was 8. She had married, and they had 2 kids. And her son, Ned, was 8 years old, and he broke his leg. And she took him around to the free clinics in New York City to try to get that leg fixed. And in a couple of cases, they recognized her because she was pretty well known up there, and they told her, get out of here. Well, she kept fooling around, and finally, the leg got infected, got gangrene, and it had to be amputated. So Ned lived with a cork leg the rest of his life. The other example I'll give you is that she was so tight that she would walk over and take her oatmeal in the morning and put on the heater in the tenement house they lived in so she wouldn't have to turn the gas on and pay the gas bill. That's how she heated up her oatmeal. In 1900, she was worth $100 million. Can you imagine that, David? 1900. $100 million. Her yearly income was $7 million. CJ, it was $7 million. When she died in 1916, she was worth $200 million. And I got put between her two kids. I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think the average individual income was in the U.S. in 1900?
$800.
Any guess? $490. And she earned $7 million. Ned Green, her son. Again, a very colorful guy. He was born in 1868 in London and died in 1936 in New York City. Again, I'm going to try to set the stage here. Ned Green, a 6 foot 4 inch, 300-pound, eccentric, one-legged son who quietly tossed away $3 million a year in yachts, coins, stamps, jewels, orchid culture, and Texas politics. He tried to run for governor one time and he didn't make it. He hated almost no one, in contrast to his mother, not even the servants who stole from him, the politicians who defeated him, the wife who bored him, or the woman who abandoned him. The only exception to the warmth this lonely, troubled, phony colonel felt for people was not. I want to make a couple more comments about him because we're going to be out of my time. He met a prostitute in Chicago when he was about 21. And her name was Mabel Harlow. And Dave, she was a good-looking, red-headed gal. A few years later, later on, she came to Dallas from Chicago, and he met her up there in Dallas. And they got hooked up, and they were together virtually all the rest of his life. He didn't marry her until Hetty died, because he and Hetty had an agreement that he would not marry as long as Hetty was alive. She was always paranoid about some gal, some lady, marrying Ned for his money. But I mentioned earlier, here's a picture of her in her black dress. They were together until 1936. They got married within a year after Hetty died. I want to talk just briefly about, he had a private car that was, I'm told, I never saw it, of course I never saw it, that was something else. And for you old Ennissites, I'll tell you, it was deep maroon in color. In 1950, and I did talk to Jerry about this, in 1950, Jerry's dad and Billy's dad and Sugar's, who's not here tonight, she's out of town, father-in-law bought a passenger car from the Southern Pacific. And for years, people kept thinking that was Ned Green's private car, but it wasn't. And he took it out to Sand Lake. Jerry, I think you told me he paid $50 for it?
Something like that.
Okay. And it probably took 10 to 20 times that to move it out there.
I think it's $500 to move.
Okay. Well, I remember as a kid, okay, that we used to go out there and play around in that car. I mean, we played board games, you know, when you're 10, 11, 12 years old, what you do. We played board games and had fun. Played a little poker, I think, Jerry. And it was in the 60s that Terrell came over here. That Terrell,
Yeah.
the people from Terrell came over and convinced him that they needed that car. And so they made some kind of trade, I don't know exactly what it was, but they took that car to Terrell. It's there today, and it's the last car of the Texas-Midland. And the number on it is 993. The number on his car was 999. So, you know, I'll tell you, I'm just about out of time. But let me encourage you, if there's a book, the book that I read from is called The Day They Shook the Plum Tree. And it's really great. There's a lot of stuff in here about Hetty and the family and the Texas-Midland. I ran across this, Steve, on Tuesday in the Wall Street Journal. And I wanted to finish up with this. And the title is How to Become Calm in America. Do I see that article? How to Become Calm in America. We're living, I tell you, in a different times. And I heard a very learned guy about a month ago in Dallas, very learned, from Virginia. And what he talked about was how things are going to change even more from what they are. And he was basically pretty optimistic at this point. But I wanted to read just a little bit from this thing on how to become calm in America. And it says, cut down on your consumption of anger-producing material. Finally, spending less time reading about politics or watching political talk shows. Spend more time on calming activities. Play a sport. Listen to music. And go to a museum. I'm through. First. First thing. Oh yeah, I'm back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Well, hopefully they will walk out with a little bit more than they walked in the front door with.
I've got everything in mind, so.
We'll check everybody for the
Okay. Well, I appreciate it.
Do you take questions?
Jim, you want to take
Oh
questions?
yeah, sure. I'm sorry. I'm so goosey about because the board said, look, don't talk long. Don't make it like church. Don't talk long. And I promised them, I said, look, I grew up and stand up, speak up, and shut up. Stand up. Okay? But Q&A. Anybody got questions?
You said Hetty had 2 sons?
No.
Oh, wow, just the 1 son?
Yeah. Had a son and a daughter.
Oh, and a daughter.
Yeah. Sylvia.
What happened to her?
Well, if you have the time, I'll tell you. She married a guy named Wilkes. They never had any kids. She lived really a pretty unfortunate type life. Of course, she inherited another baby, okay, in 1960. She lived to be about, she was 8 when she died. And I think she died in 1960. Anyway, she inherited virtually all of Ned's net worth. And his net worth was now down to about 37 million when he died. So and he squandered, and that was in the summary I gave you. I mean, he had the most extensive collection of stamps, coins, jewelry, etc., etc. If you can think about his relationship with his mother, and think about he went the opposite way. I mean, she was so kind, and he had all his money. Of course, I don't think when I was trying to research this thing, she didn't enjoy her money at all. All she enjoyed was making a deal, screwing somebody, and making a deal. But all of his net worth, his remaining net worth, went to her. And when she died, or before she died, she gave it all away. She gave everything that she had. I mean, the people still didn't know. So, good question.
Did you want to mention the dishes and the doorknob over here?
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's Neil's video. Neil Blackstone has a couple of memorabilia over there. Is it a doorknob and what else?
Dishes from the railroad.
Some dishes, yes, from the railroad, yes.
The doorknob, I think, is supposed to be from that car 999.
Okay.
It's up there on the wall.
Good. Well, hey, I invite you to go take a look at it.
Yeah.
And we'll leave this stuff out for you to just look at as you're leaving. What else? Anything?
I've heard Hetty Green turned Colonel Green. Did you know anything about how he got his title?
Yes.
I assume it was honorary.
Yes. I know exactly how he got it. He got into politics after they sold the railroad. And I mentioned he tried to run for governor one time. But he got into politics, and he was big with contributions to the politicians. And he got that from the governor. A governor, and I may mispronounce it, Colquitt, Governor Colquitt, gave him that title and put him on his official staff, probably just because of the contribution he got. And from then on out, and thank you for asking that question, from then on out, he always went by Colonel Green. Now he died when he was about 6 or 7. But he always went by Colonel Green, and of course, his relationship with, let me just mention one other thing. His relationship with Mabel, the prostitute, was off and on, over the years. One quick story. His private car was named Mabel. Had Mabel on the 999. Ned went to a convention, a railroad convention in New Orleans. And he left Mabel in Dallas. Well, she got bored. They weren't married at this point. He hired her as his housekeeper. She was his housekeeper for like 3 years. And she got bored, so she contacted one of the Katy executives that she knew, went over and saw him, and they hooked up and got on the train and went to New Orleans so he could go to the convention. As they're pulling in to the station in New Orleans. She raises the blind, and there's the maple. She's looking right at it. He finds out about it. He finds that she's there. He's upset. He has contacts, and he gets to put in jail for 48 hours. He's mad at her. Right after that, he changes the name from Mabel to Lone Star. And then from Lone Star, he changed it back years later to 999. So that's on her grant. Anything else? Thanks for coming.
I have a story. I gotta tell this.
Yeah.
Very short. Very short. So, my name is Jerry Don Moran. I live at 703 North Preston Street. So I wasn't looking for property, but this house fell into my lap. And I look back and there's the divine in my life, because you couldn't blast me out of my house. I love it. I love this town. I love my house, my home. So my first night in Ennis, this is how I was welcomed. I was the only one in my house. It's original hardwood floors. If you remember the I Love Lucy episode where they're on their way to California and they're in some place where there's a big train right next, and their bed goes across the room. Remember when that train comes? So I knew nothing of Ennis's train history. I was in this house by myself. Everyone was coming the next morning, along with my belongings, to help me move into my house. So this is what happened. I heard this distant noise, and it got louder and louder and louder, to that point I thought, what is coming through my house? It was my first experience with the train. It was scary. It was beyond anything I'd ever heard. That's how I spent April 1st of 2005 alone in my house. That's how I was introduced to the trains in Ennis, to where now I'm going on, I guess, 16, 17 years. I just love the train when it comes. It lulls me to sleep. I'm used to it. Sometimes I don't hear it, but it's just so gentle compared to that first night.
Thank you, Jerry John. When I was born, we lived backing up to the tracks in Greenville, and my dad would hear the train come through about 2:30 every morning, and he was a postman, so he got up from there and started delivering mail. Well, one day the train didn't come through. He said, "What was that?" Okay, we are dismissed. We will see y'all. Well, and there's some goodies over here, and we'll see y'all on the third Thursday of next year, next month. Thank you very much.
And I was just going to let everybody know you're welcome to look around, but we do have an open house scheduled for December 2nd, the night of Lights of Ennis. So the museum will be open from 5 to 8, and we will have the baggage building open next door with the model train display going. So bring family, and we'll have cookies and juice boxes for little kids, and the caboose will be open at that time. So if you want to come by and get some pictures.
Will Santa be here?
Santa will not be here. We'll have a cardboard cutout Santa with our cute background, so it's still going to be a great photo op, but you'll get a view from here of the parade going by and stuff like that. So you're definitely invited. Spread the word about that.
Thanks to y'all for hosting us. It's been great. Really appreciate it. Okay. Thank you for coming.
Okay.